What's going on, everybody? This is the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer and co-host Chris Brito. The NBA has announced next season's schedule, so we'll break down which games we have circled on the calendar. Plus, do we think Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell will be traded before training camp? Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Stevie, happy to be here. Another episode of the All Hoops podcast. Now that the season schedule's out, I feel like the season approaching is becoming a reality. And whenever the best part about the whole season is this part where we can sort of like imagine what the rest of the season could look like. And we're gonna break down some of the games that we like, that we're interested in going to see potentially, whether it's in New York or in other cities. And one of the things that stood out to me were, the Knicks are starting out their season against Memphis. I feel like that's a good early test. And then I'm looking to also see, you know, Christmas Day, the Christmas Day games. We were just talking about how there are NFL games that same day too. So like we'll talk more about that at the end. But right off the bat, Steve, which game are you looking forward to the most?
Yeah, let's start from the beginning. Let's start with Knicks in Memphis, October 19th. Grizzlies are a great team. They're going to have John Morant healthy, most likely, knock on wood. But, that's a great team. You have a test right away. And, you started last season with the Boston Celtics. You win that crazy game in overtime. You get bing bong going outside the Garden. You're 1-0. People are going nuts. Absolutely bing bong. And so if the Knicks, which is unlikely, but if they're able to pull off this Memphis road win, you'd have these fans going nuts thinking Jalen Brunson is the savior, Julius Randle is back, and, this young bench is going to be, incredible. So I think if they're able to get off to a hot start against a great team, that's really going to put the fans even more riled up than they always are.
Well, one of the games that I'm looking forward to, because I agree with you. I think if the Knicks start out strong, I think that'll bode well for like the rest of the season. Last season that happened, but unfortunately the team didn't really live up to expectations, to put it mildly. One of the games I'm looking forward to is when we play the Utah Jazz in November, November 15th. It's going to be on TNT.
Utah's only TNT game of the year. So keep that in mind.
Only TNT game of the year.
Eyes emoji.
Right. So I have a few thoughts on this whole, like, we'll talk about, I guess we'll talk about it more in the next segment, but Donovan Mitchell may not be on that team. And this might be a return to Utah game. So that's one of the games that I'm most looking forward to. I'd even stay up till 10 o'clock to watch that one. But it's definitely one of those things that makes you think, what does the NBA know that we don't know? And hopefully something does happen.
I look at that as basically a win-win for the NBA. This is either Donovan Mitchell's return to Utah as a Knick, or it's going to be Donovan Mitchell still a member of the Jazz and a lot of hype about, is he facing his future team? And I think the NBA is confident that Donovan Mitchell will either be a member of the Jazz or the Knicks come, what did you say, November 15th? And so I think that's where the NBA is confident. Not that he's going to be a Knick, but he's either going to be a Knick or a member of the Jazz.
I guess that's smart in them planning out this game early on in the season. But you know what, Steve? You're right. I mean, I think this whole issue with Donovan Mitchell is so like polarizing in the sense that, like, not that we don't want Donovan Mitchell, because we do, but it brings up the original sin question of, will the Knicks overpay to get him? And I'm of the belief that the Knicks should wait this out. The Utah Jazz clearly are in tank mode, in my opinion. They don't have a good enough team built around Donovan Mitchell to begin with. Really, they're at the point of the season where it's really hard to acquire significant talent upgrades. So the Knicks don't really need Donovan Mitchell in the sense that they were operating as if they don't have him anyway. So I think that the Jazz, as we get closer to the season, might feel a little bit more of the panic button, despite what reports say that, Donovan Mitchell's okay with going or staying. Um, and I think in general, I think this might be the one of the few times where Danny Ainge is losing leverage by the day as you get closer to the regular season, in my opinion.
Yeah, Chris, I think we're both on the same page here. I think both of us would like Donovan Mitchell to be a New York Knick. We don't need Donovan Mitchell to be a New York Knick. I think it would be exciting. I think we'd be rushing to go get our Donovan Mitchell jerseys, right? He's a superstar guy. He's one of my personal favorite players. I just question the fit a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Defensively, he's just not been consistent since basically his first 2 years in the NBA. You couple that with Brunson, who tries, but he's undersized. I think that's going to be an issue. I think having him in a full training camp with the Knicks could help, where Thibodeau can kind of see what his strengths and weaknesses are on defense and try to make plays and schemes and formulas to try to hide the Brunson Mitchell backcourt defensively. Where if you got Donovan Mitchell in February, I think it'll be a lot harder for Thibodeau to figure that part of the game out. So I think there is some kind of advantage of having him here for a full season. Having said that, it's as you said, they shouldn't overpay. If they have the best offer on the table, great. But this idea that they're going to throw 6, 7 draft picks or RJ Barrett into a deal, it's just not happening. It's not happening, at least according to you and I, right? 4
Uh-huh.
first rounders and maybe one of a top end quickly Grimes, with Grimes being the one I'm trying to hold on to the most as one of the only good young wings on this team besides for Barrett. So look, that's a pretty good haul. 4 first round picks plus a young player. If they think they can do better than that, if I'm the Knicks, I'm saying, hey, go show us an offer that's better than that, and we'll see if we can beat it.
I mean, look, we have there was an athletic report out earlier this week that talked about how the Charlotte Hornets and the Washington Wizards are also interested in pursuing a trade. But as a matter of fact, they don't really have anything that could really supersede the Knicks offer. And unless you're offering LaMelo Ball if you're the Hornets, and unless you are, I don't know who you could offer for the Wizards, but no one really comes to mind in the sense that would appeal to a Utah Jazz that is clearly rebuilding. I don't see anybody on that team that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I don't get it. And what I'm thinking is Michael Jordan and company went to Utah and said, hey, how do we get Donovan Mitchell? And they probably said, all right, give us a bunch of. Michael hung up the phone and said, we're keeping the team we have. And now Utah is using, hey, we talked to Charlotte as leverage to say, hey, you better come make a move. And I honestly believe, it's crazy to say this, Leon Rose and the New York Knicks are too smart for that, Chris. It seems like that's where we are right now. And with Washington, Bradley Beal's not eligible to be traded. The Beal Mitchell fit, I feel like they're very similar players. They have the same strengths and weaknesses. They could score, and pairing them together, I think, would be a problem defensively. And at the same time,
Disaster.
the Wizards' young players, to me, just don't have a ton of value. Like Rui Hachimura has had his ups and downs. He's a guy who has not been healthy, and you got to pay him soon. Is that somebody Utah's going to be like crawling to get? They don't have a ton of first round picks. They lose one with the Russell Westbrook deal, right? And so I just don't really see where other suitors are coming from that could beat the Knicks offer. Now, if Utah came out and said, hey, we got Sacramento on the phone, they're crazy, you never know what they can do, maybe that should get the Knicks worried. But the two teams we hear in these reports just don't have the assets to make this work.
And it's almost laughable, right? Because it's like, listen, we're not there, we're not reporting this, obviously, but even we can sort of like see through it, that it was clearly a leverage play. And that to me shows like Danny Ainge is like I'm not, maybe the word panic is a little bit too strong, but I'm sure there's like a heightened level of concern that, they're not really getting anything better than the Knicks, and the Knicks aren't budging. And so the way I see this playing out, you don't want to waste any time really on this like stars like career. So I think in the interest of good client relations, they're going to want to trade him because Donovan Mitchell knows, like, this team clearly is not even going to get past it's not even going to make the playoffs, quite frankly. So I don't know. I think the move from here is Danny Ainge is probably going to trade him over the next month and a half.
We've talked about this a lot from the Knicks perspective, but from a Danny Ainge Utah perspective, what are they waiting for here? What can they get more out of this? Are they hoping a team gets an injury and becomes more desperate? Are they waiting to say, like, how does their leverage increase? What are they waiting for? Because it seems like it's kind of a take it or leave it situation.
Well, the only thing I can think of, I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe the Lakers getting involved. I mean,
Anthony Davis?
it's not Anthony Davis,
You're
maybe.
gonna trade LeBron?
I mean, it would have to be a multi-team trade that doesn't
And
involve.
LeBron just got extended, so it can't be him either.
I mean, I think the way you do it is probably trading Russ to the Jazz, Donovan going to a third team, and then that third team sending assets to the Lakers and the Jazz. It's the only thing I can think of.
I don't, if you wanted to do that, I don't see why you couldn't do that now. Like, I don't see how those offers are going to get better in a month unless one thing happens. Maybe the Knicks, the Lakers, and the Jazz are working on something, right? And it's Julius Randle going to LA, Westbrook going to Utah, Mitchell going to New York, and everybody sending the Jazz $1 million draft picks. What if the Lakers are saying, okay, this is our plan B to Kyrie Irving. We're waiting for the Kyrie Irving situation to take place. If we can't get him, we'll do this Westbrook and picks for Randall thing. That's the only way it makes sense where Utah's leverage could increase. But for the most part, I feel like it's just going to be take it or leave it on what is probably a pretty good return for Utah, regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I agree on that assessment. I also think the net situation is not going to change.
No.
Like, we could actually talk about that now if you want, Steve.
Yeah, let's do that now. So obviously, Kevin Durant saga is continuing on, and the latest is he's saying he wants Marks and Nash fired, and I don't really get why. And it's weird where you're not hearing anything from the player in terms of details of why he's upset. He's not leaking it to anybody. And it seems like the team itself has no idea. And this is a player who is about to start, I repeat, start a 4-year, $194 million deal. And he wants out of that. And the team really doesn't seem to know why.
So there are two thoughts. I think the Nets are sort of banking on Kevin Durant heading into training camp and hoping for Kyrie to give him a sort of change of heart. I think we're giving Kevin Durant too much credit as someone who is firm on their convictions. I mean, not that Kyrie is either, but I think Kyrie has some sway over KD since he's the one who brought him to Brooklyn in the first place. I feel like Kyrie could be the person that would tell Kevin, listen, Kevin, let's figure this out. Let's try to win a championship in Brooklyn this year. Because if we're looking at the roster as it stands now, that could be a roster that can make the Eastern Conference Finals. Like if Kevin Durant and Kyrie buy in, they're gonna stay. And so right now, if I were a betting man, I don't usually bet, but I'm willing to bet that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving play in the first game for Brooklyn this year.
I would agree. I think that's going to happen. And I think this is going so slowly, more slowly than either of us thought. I thought some team by now would come out and be like, all right, here's all of our picks. Here's a good young player. Take it or leave it. This is a pretty good offer. And I don't, from what I understand, the Nets have just not had that happen. I think the Jaylen Brown and a pick and something was probably the closest thing to it. And I don't think that's enough. And the Nets without all their draft picks, should not be weren't swayed by that. So I just don't see this going the way KD wants. And unless he's going to start sitting out games, which is going to be a major bummer and something I don't expect to happen, I just think he's going to have to report, and we're going to get answers from him on why he wants this.
Yeah, and listen, like he's the one who's losing another year where he could tack on more points in the all-time records and all these things that I'm sure is on their mind. So, you know, I think many times we paint it as the players having leverage, but you know, I'm not saying this about KD specifically, but a lot of players have vested interest in playing for many different reasons, among them making a lot more money. So I'm willing to bet that like Kyrie and Kevin Durant will be playing for the Nets in game 1 for the Nets.
Yeah, I think so too. To wrap this up, do you think the Nets did the right thing telling KD they won't fire the coach or the GM?
Yeah, they did. Because I think for 2 reasons. One of them being that Sean Marks is it for all the stuff that I may have said in the past. I feel like he's a top 5 executive in the league. And then B, you don't want to create a culture in your team where so Kyrie has framed the partnership as sort of the relationship between Kevin and Kyrie with Nets management as a partnership.
Yeah.
Right. I think that whole like ultimatum sort of put the damper on the perception that it was a partnership. It's not a partnership because one of them is paying a lot of money. Necessarily, right? Like basically what I'm trying to say, you don't want to create a culture where the players decide what the rest of the organization is doing. Like Kyrie, of course, I mean Kevin Durant, of course, is a very talented player, but you don't want that to set a precedent for other teams or the rest of the NBA.
And like, where does it end? Because they already got Kenny Atkinson fired, who was having a really good time, building a culture for this Nets team. They got him fired. Whether there's reports that Durant and Irving wanted Steve Nash, or some that said they had no influence in it. Regardless, it's the second coach they would try to get killed. I don't really see how that would be the end. I think they would just be, it would continue on, and they would want a big say in who's next. And, what does KD want? Does he want his management to take over as GM of the Nets? I don't know.
Who knows, man? Like, I think the only person that knows what KD wants is KD. And even then, I'm not that sure.
Yeah.
With all due respect.
It seems like it's constantly changing. There's reports that KD wants to distance himself from Kyrie after being embarrassed the last couple of years. There's some that say KD wants to embarrass the Nets for the way they treated Kyrie Irving. So there's really no way to know any of these things. And I think it's going to take some time to find out because, once he gets to training camp, it's going to be a circus. People are going to ask him, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And he's going to give, vague answers that make it seem like he's too good to talk to the media. But eventually we will find out.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Chris, let's get to our final thoughts right after this. Chris, final thoughts time here. Ben Simmons got a settlement with the Sixers. They owed him about $20 million. They withheld because basically he didn't want to go to work. And it's a very tricky situation because he said he is having back pain. We didn't really believe it at first because he was going to the training camps. And then all of a sudden he gets to the Nets and he's still not playing. And then he winds up getting the back surgery. So we don't know how much time he really missed due to injury. He probably was entitled to that money, but you have to admit he was not a good sport for Philly this year. So we probably won't know for a while how much money he got back, but I'm guessing it's a very important issue in the next CBA to make sure something like this does not keep happening.
Where do we start with this? I mean, I think it was we probably talked about Ben Simmons on, I want to say, at least 10 or 15 episodes last year. And it's such a tough thing to even comment on because you have Ben Simmons who was talking about undergoing mental health issues. And if that's what he was going through. That's what he was going through. And then on the NBA and the Sixers part, I think they don't need to explain it to us, but I think they need to explain why they didn't see that as a concern enough, A, or B, why it devolved such a situation where, you know, the framing of Ben Simmons, like, I feel like Ben Simmons' character was more or less assassinated that last season. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't do himself any favors either. Um, it's tough, man. It's such a hard like thing to like say whether it was the wrong or right thing, but this next CBA, man, there's gonna be a lot of things that are gonna be sorted out, and I'm sure that the mental health aspect is gonna be among the priorities.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to say how do we stop players with 4 years on their deal requesting trades and basically saying, if you don't trade me, I'm going to sit out. How do they stop that from happening? Is it some kind of no trade clause for both sides and say, hey, owners can't trade players, players can't, request trades for 2 years? How can players break that? Can owners break that? What happens if both sides want it broken? So it's a mess of a situation, but it's something that's gonna be very fascinating in the next CBA. Another thing that's gonna be fascinating going forward is the NBA's Christmas Day schedule looks as fantastic as ever. We got our Knicks in there. All the contenders are basically playing, but coincidentally, it's on a Sunday this year. And so NFL has come to play with 3 big games of their own. And can 3 decent NFL games take away the NBA's biggest regular season day of the year this year?
Is that a question?
It is a question.
I'm gonna say yes. I mean, I feel like even looking at even my own behavior, like during the season, like that's toward the end of the season, right? For the NFL.
Yeah,
There are a lot of fantasy football championships or like playoff implications being
that's
decided.
also a good point. I didn't think of that.
And I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna be one of the people who are like gonna be watching a lot of the NFL while I'm watching basketball too. I mean, it's tough. I mean, like the Broncos Rams game, I I'm probably gonna watch that one. Lakers Warriors are on the same time, so like I'm gonna have to be flipping channels, but you know what? There's gonna be a happy medium, like you're gonna probably watch a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. It's tough though, because I enjoy both sports. I think it definitely gets more complicated after the Knicks Sixers game, which starts at noon. I think the next NFL game is at 1 o'clock. I think that's Miami, Green Bay. I'm probably not gonna watch that one, but the rest of the afternoon and evening, holy shoot.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And I'm very curious to see how those ratings come in and see, does the NFL have the stranglehold on all sports that we all think they do? So that'll be fascinating to see. And that is going to do it for us here on the All Who's podcast. Chris, thanks as always. Next week, we'll be back breaking down division by division, each of them before the season starts in about 2 months.
Bye, everyone.